How do I say Maori properly?
Hey, brother. Maori.
Maori.
Say it again. Maori.
Maori. Today's story is about these lads. Lads so tough that allegedly German General Rommel said of them,
"Give me the Maori Battalion and I will conquer the world."
Now let's get this straight, this video isn't a deep dive into Maori culture, it's simply a look at the history of the Maori in the two world wars. Okay, so for anyone who doesn't know, who are the Maori? Let's look up that simple question. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, it says here the Maori are a member of the Polynesian people of New Zealand. Their traditional history describes their origins in terms of waves of migration that culminated in the arrival of the Great Fleet in the 14th century from Hawaii, a mythical land usually identified as Tahiti. So there you go. Now, as you'd expect, when the Europeans finally arrived a few hundred years later, there was a bit of a scrap. Nothing new there. The New Zealand Wars are fascinating in their own right and deserve an entire series. One day we'll do it. Suffice it to say, it took multiple wars and significant British military deployment for the Maori to finally be defeated. So briefly, why were the Maori so damn tough? Well, Ian Knight, in his brilliant book Warriors in Scarlet, has a section, and he wrote, because friction between Maori groups in pre-colonial times was therefore a commonplace, most Maori men adhered to a strong warrior ethic. The idea of a full-time professional army with formally constituted units and command structures was entirely alien to the Maori, not least because individuals could not be released for long from their civilian responsibilities, and wars were therefore usually short affairs to be managed when the men were not required to plant crops or to harvest them. You know, that sounds quite similar to the Zulu, where I live in South Africa. Anyway, let's carry on. Ian goes on to say, battles were often fought out in the open at arranged locations and times to allow both sides to test the mettle of their warriors to the full. But ambushes and surprise attacks on enemy settlements were not unknown. The stakes, if a settlement fell, were high. Most of the fighting men would be killed and the women and children taken as slaves. The heads of fallen enemies were often cut off and carried away to be smoke-dried as trophies in degradation of their mana. That word mana is important. Let me make sure I'm pronouncing it right.
Mana's easy. Ma-na.
Mana.
So the sound. Ma-na.
So that's my mate Mike. Luckily, he's from New Zealand. He served in the New Zealand Army and he understands Maori language and culture. So I've got him on the line to help me out through this episode, which I will inevitably still make lots of mistakes. Not his problem, mine. Now, it says on this website, nzhistory.gov.nz, mana is often referred to as status. A person with mana had a presence. While mana was inherited, individuals could also acquire, increase or lose it through their actions. Rangatira, or chiefs in particular, recognised the need to keep their mana as high as possible. Mana influenced the behaviour of people and groups and was sought through achievements and successes. So I guess it's a bit like honour. Anyway, with the arrival of the Europeans, the Maori quickly learned to use firearms. They soon became very proficient with them and made life difficult for their adversaries. They were also experts in a form of defensive warfare, utilising strong fortified strongpoints known as pars. These were very impressive forts. Let's have a look at one. This one is, I don't know how you say this, let's go back to Mike.
The place name Ruapekapeka.
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 So let's have a look at Ruapekapeka. It says in 1846, Ruapekapeka Pa was a remarkable fortification with its double row of massive timber palisades, rifle trenches, flanking angles and bomb-proof bunkers. It was a masterpiece of military engineering. Let's have a quick video of that. There we go. This is what it would have looked like. This is from Ruapekapeka Pa Overview.
The remains of Ruapekapeka Pa look down commandingly over the landscape.
Anyway, let's not get too deep into that because, like I say, we'll do a whole separate series on the Maori Wars eventually. Okay, we've looked at the background of the Maori. We've learned a little bit about their history and their culture. But what happened during World War I? Let's find out. Now, there's a good article here on the Imperial War Museum website, How Maori Battled to Fight Together in the First World War. It says here, imperial and colonial governments initially sought to prevent Maori from participating in the First World War. While a small number of Maori volunteered to serve with regional infantry units, Britain and New Zealand continued a pre-war policy opposing the formation of an all-Maori unit to fight in a war against Europeans. Yet by 1918, over 2,500 Maori soldiers had served overseas, the majority in what became known as the Maori Pioneer Battalion. Now, despite those initial reservations, the Maori did soon have a chance to prove themselves in battle. The fighting at Gallipoli was fierce, and like most other units, the Maoris suffered incredible casualties. Here's an excerpt from a newspaper article I found online where Captain F.M. Twizzleton, great name, praises the Maori. Twice I had Maoris under me and in rather ticklish places, and I've also seen a lot of them in action, and I must say they're good. A man need not wish to lead better material into action no matter how desperate the fighting might be. I should say they are amongst the best bayonet fighters in the world, and they are perfect sentries. As trench fighters you can't beat them. That's high praise indeed, because the Kiwis in general were excellent soldiers. Still are. Sorry for the noise, by the way. I've got the builders in. I'm just going to try and crack on. Now, they were heavily involved in the fighting at Gallipoli and at a place called Chanook Bear, I think that's how you say it, in August 1915. Here's a short clip I found on YouTube of Dr. Monte Souter, Auckland Museum's World War I historian in residence, describing that action. Let's have a look.
Māori were involved in taking the foothills on the 6th of August, and that was probably the most successful part of the whole battle. And they used a haka to scare the Turks at night, and then cleared the trenches with the bayonet and rifle, along with other New Zealanders.
As you probably know, Gallipoli was a bit of a disaster, and eventually the Allies were forced to evacuate. Next up for the Maori was the Western Front. But for some reason, before they went there, they were merged with another unit and redesignated as pioneers, digging trenches and drains, doing farm work, laying railway lines, erecting wire entanglements, that sort of thing. But in fairness, the work of pioneers was far from easy. It was bloody dangerous work and was often done under shell fire and within range of snipers. Let's go back to that Imperial War Museum article that we looked at earlier for a bit more information. They say in September 1917, reinforced by a number of new recruits, the unit was once again made an all-Maori unit with mostly non-Maori officers and renamed the New Zealand Maori Pioneer Battalion. The battalion remained on the Western Front until the end of the war. Of the 2,227 men who had served in the unit since 1914, nearly half became casualties, with 336 dead and a further 734 wounded. 38 members of the contingent and pioneer regiment received the military medal, while 4 received the DCM and 9 the military cross. That's an impressive record, and I can only assume that these lads took every opportunity they could to get stuck into the Germans. On its return from Europe in 1919, the Maori Pioneer Battalion was enthusiastically cheered at homecomings across New Zealand. Yet divisions remained in New Zealand society. Though equal war pensions were awarded to white and Maori soldiers, Maori were largely excluded from the ballot to allocate land and vocational training to returning soldiers during the Discharged Soldiers Settlement Act of 1915. That's a sad end to the war, and I must say they deserved better. But let's fast forward to World War II, because they also played a big part there. This website is nzhistory.gov.nz, and it says here, despite some opposition, nearly 16,000 Maori enlisted for service during the Second World War. By 1945, 28 Maori Battalion had become one of New Zealand's most celebrated and decorated units. Now, I don't know if you say 28 or 28. Let's go with 28. So who were 28 Maori Battalion and what did they achieve? Let's find out more. Now, these guys have got a fantastic website actually, 28maoribattalion.org.nz. Says here, the 28th Maori Battalion was part of the 2nd New Zealand Division, the fighting arm of the 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Force during the Second World War. It was a frontline infantry unit made up entirely of volunteers. The battalion usually contained 700 to 750 men divided into 5 companies. So the unit first saw action in Greece, and then after Greece was evacuated, they fought the Germans in Crete during that invasion where the Germans attacked from the air. This was in 1941, and it says here, as enemy reinforcements poured in, the Maori Battalion took part in the belated Allied attempt to wrest back control of the key Malemi airfield. They used the bayonet to good effect in a spirited night attack, but were forced to withdraw as daylight approached, leaving 33 dead behind.
New Zealand losses were 50%. The British were tiring. Equipment was being lost. Supply was failing.
The 27th of May 1941 saw really heavy fighting. The battalion war diary says, 0400 hours arrive at new area, bed down for night. 0800 hours move back 400 metres to 42nd Street. 0900 hours aerial blitz begins, all types of planes in evidence. 10:30 hours after being opened fire on by enemy at close quarters, forward coys A, B and C fixed bayonets and charged with full vocal accompaniment. The battalion's casualties were 6 killed and 10 wounded, while they claimed to have killed 80 Germans. It's amazing what you can find online, and here's a first-hand account from Fred Baker, who was with the battalion. Jerry tried to hold us back with everything he had. We had no supporting fire except Bren and Tommy guns fired from the hip as we came. We walked all the way, jumped into his first positions, bayoneted or Tommy gunned them, then walked on to his next line. My fellows behaved as if they were on parade, and after we got to his second line, he started to crack and run. We got to about his fourth line before we met any further opposition. We soon silenced that. By that time, all opposition had vanished. The rest of the day he spent in reforming at a safe distance and once again dealing with us from the air. But despite the bravery of lads like the Maori, Crete was eventually abandoned. The Germans were too powerful. The New Zealanders were now deployed to North Africa to fight Rommel's famous Afrika Korps. They were all over the shop and fought in numerous battles, including the famous one at El Alamein in 1942. Now, there's this excellent Daily Mail article that I found. It says here, combatants on both sides of the fight held them in awe, even if their courage meant they sustained devastating casualties. Germany's legendary tank commander, Erwin Rommel, who faced the Kiwis in North Africa, said of them, "Give me a Maori battalion and I will conquer the world." Among the many attributes Rommel admired the Maori for were their skills with a bayonet and their ruthlessness. Now, I've not been able to find the original source of that quote, so if you know where it came from or you've actually read that in a book about Rommel, please comment below. Now, if I skip forward down the article, we can learn about the first Maori Victoria Cross.
So te is the Moana Nui, Kiwa Na Rimu. So I run it together, I run it all again, and I'll do it a few times. Te Moana Nui a Kiwa Na Rimu.
So during the campaign in North Africa, 2 members of the battalion were recommended for Victoria Crosses, the highest award in the British honours system. So Te Moana Akiwa Narimu, Lieutenant, received a posthumous Victoria Cross after he was killed in action during Operation Supercharged 2, part of the Tunisian campaign. Says he personally knocked out several machine gun posts during an assault at Tebaga Gap and repelled German attacks after capturing a key position. Despite wounds to his shoulder and his leg, Narimu refused to leave his position and was killed by the enemy. Lieutenant Narimu's full citation can be found online. And in the final paragraph it says, during another determined counterattack by the enemy, part of his line broke. Yelling orders and encouragement, he rallied his men and led them in a fierce onslaught back into their old positions. All through the night between attacks, he and his men were heavily harassed by machine gun fire and mortar fire, but Second Lieutenant Narimu watched the line very carefully, cheering his men on and inspiring them by his gallant personal conduct. Morning found him still in possession of the hill feature, but only he and 2 unwounded other ranks remained. Reinforcements were sent up to him in the morning. The enemy again counterattacked, and it was during this attack that Second Lieutenant Narimu was killed. He was killed on his feet, defiantly facing the enemy with his Tommy gun at his hip. As he fell, he came to rest almost on top of those of the enemy who had fallen, the number of whom testified to his outstanding courage and fortitude. Let's go back to that Mail article again, because there's more brave deeds. The other man mentioned in the article is Sergeant Hane Manahi, who was recommended for the VC but was later revised to a DCM. He led a section of men up a sheer limestone escarpment to capture a number of Italian positions during the fighting around Takruna in 1943. In New Zealand, Manahi is far from forgotten. I found this news report online. Let's have a quick look.
Years of fighting for his recognition, which did not come about, we have accepted the final verdict of the Queen.
Unlike my father, he got the DCM, well, that was enough for him. Never bothered about it.
No te tau 2012 I whakatakotohia tētahi hoari me e...
You might want to note there, Prince Andrew clearly not sweating, despite wearing those traditional robes and having a warrior armed with a spear walking towards him. Anyway, once the Germans were forced out of North Africa, the Maori and the rest of the New Zealand contingent followed them to Italy.
Monte Cassino is the mountain above the town of Cassino, through which ran the main route to the Italian capital. It was the perfect vantage point for German forces, so capturing it was essential for the Allies to breach the Gustav Line and advance towards Rome. But it turned into one of the bloodiest engagements of World War II.
Let's return to 28th Maori Battalion.org. Says, of all the battles involving the Maori Battalion in the Second World War, none was more brutal or costly than the struggle for Cassino in early 44. The towering 500-metre Monte Cassino, topped by a Benedictine monastery, dominated the route to Rome through the Liri Valley. Below it lay the Rapido River and the heavily defended town of Cassino. Several Allied attacks had failed before the New Zealanders arrived. On the night of the 17th, 18th of February 1944, the Maori Battalion attacked the town's railway station, but when supporting tanks were unable to get through, they were forced to withdraw under heavy fire. A and B companies suffered terrible losses, with 128 out of 200 men killed, wounded or captured. After another unsuccessful attack in March, which saw desperate close-range fighting in the ruins of the town, the New Zealanders were withdrawn in early April. Cassino eventually fell to Polish troops in mid-May 1944. But despite the hammering they received at Cassino, terrible casualties, the Maori remained in the fight until the end of the war. The Maori Battalion finally sailed for home on Boxing Day 1945, and on their arrival in Wellington on the 23rd of January 1946, the 780 troops were welcomed as returning heroes before dispersing to their home or marae throughout the country. The Second World War, it says, was an important milestone in Maori Pakeha relations, Pakeha being the white people. The efforts and reputation of the Maori were a great source of pride for the Maori people and for the whole of New Zealand. It says here on 28th MaoriBattalion.org, in total almost 3,600 men served overseas with the Maori Battalion between 1940 and 45. Of these, 649 were killed in action or died on active service. That was more than 10% of the 6,068 New Zealanders who lost their lives serving with 2nd NZEF in the Middle East and Europe. In addition, 1,712 men were wounded and 237 were prisoners of war. In the words of Lieutenant General Bernard Freiberg, who commanded the 2nd NZ Division, no infantry battalion had a more distinguished record or saw more fighting or, alas, had such heavy casualties as the Maori Battalion. And even now, the Maori are an important and integral part of the modern New Zealand Defence Force. In Afghanistan, Willie Apiata was awarded the VC for his actions in 2004 when his troop was attacked by Taliban fighters. His citation says, in total disregard of his own safety, Lance Corporal Apiata stood up and lifted his comrade bodily. He then carried him across the 70 metres of broken, rocky and fire-swept ground, fully exposed in the glare of battle to heavy enemy fire and into the face of returning fire from the main troop position. That neither he nor his colleague were hit is scarcely possible. Having delivered his wounded companion to the relative shelter with the remainder of the patrol, Lance Corporal Apiata rearmed himself and rejoined the fight in counterattack. A brave man indeed. So I hope you think that's been a fair introduction to the history of Maori soldiers in the New Zealand Army, especially in the First and Second World War. I've really enjoyed learning about it. Thanks to my mate Mike for his helpful hints on pronunciation. Now grab yourself a brew, I'll be back next week. If there's any other stories, subjects or people you'd like to see me cover here on the Redcoat History channel, please comment below. Alright guys.